The next slide, if there's any slide at all that I'd like to make sure people get, this is the one. And I say that because as a person who gets a lot of phone calls, what you hear, there's usually two time periods that people call. It's early on, and then it's at around 4 or 5 months or something like that, which I'm going to explain. So I think a lot of what we do in these kind of seminars is help people just try to understand so that when these things happen to them, they don't find them as complicated or they don't find them as surprising. My little caveat on the top is that I'm saying that I'm not suggesting that anyone in this room had a person have an average death. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just simply saying if you were to look at 1,000 grieving people, on average, something like this would happen. So first of all, to get past a normal loss, data, research, people, experience, whatever, would tell us it's a year or two. Now, society is maybe giving you a day or a week or two. Business is often giving you a couple days. You're allowed to take off a couple personal days. And then you're expected not only to come back, but to come back as if nothing ever happened. And that's extremely frustrating right there. Even in hospitals where you'd expect it to be different, their rules are, I mean, it's just the same across the board. So that's an area of frustration. But what happens during these 1 to 2 years goes something like this. The first few months, most people, depending upon the death and how it occurred and the closeness and all those things we mentioned before, find that they're in a state of almost shock. They're almost in a numbed state. People will say to me, I was at the funeral. I don't even know how I got through it. I know I was there. People will even use words like, I felt I was kind of hovering over it. I wasn't really a part of it, or anything to that effect, almost like sort of a distant relationship and yet present at the same time. And in many ways, that's the body's like natural anesthesia kicking in to sort of help protect us from the extreme pain that's going on. Then, after about 3 months or so, in that time period, say 3 to 6 months, typically more toward the 6 probably than toward the 3, that's when people usually start to get worse. That's when they usually start to experience the pain more and more. And what I was saying before is a lot of times people call in the beginning, then in around 4 or 5 months, because what happens is around 5 months they usually call and say, I really thought I was doing pretty well, and now I feel horrible, and there's got to be something wrong with me. And they don't realize that what's the most common is that this is the time when most people start to really slide down that slope, okay? And the reason for that, there's many. So first of all, I just want you to know that. But if you think about it, soon after someone dies, there's usually a lot of stuff that we have to do, so we're very distracted. Usually there are a lot of people in our life, friends, family, they're living with us for a while. Churches are dumping food in our kitchens day after day, et cetera, et cetera. No one really wants to eat all that at that time. But then slowly but surely, all that starts to just wane. I mean, it starts to go away. People start stopping, or they stop talking about it. They start assuming you're better. They start talking about going back to something else, which seems to you much more trivial. And it just sort of begins to work that way. To the point where around 6 months, a lot of people tell me this is where I felt worse than I ever have. All right? So don't be surprised if you have that sense. Particularly, we're going to talk about the holidays in a few minutes, particularly if the 6-month period is right around now or a few months, because it's a sort of a double whammy. We got the effect of the holidays we'll talk about, as well as that sort of low spot to begin with. Then, commonly, 6 to 12 months is when people say, I started to feel like I've turned a corner and I've started to come out of it. You don't really see it, like day after day. You don't feel like all of a sudden, boom, the cold is gone and I'm better. But you start to look back and say, I can do something, I can talk about, I can whatever, and I couldn't do that 2 months ago. And that's the way people start to recognize that they're sort of turning the corner. Doesn't mean you won't have another dip and things aren't up and down and all around because of all those factors, but certainly that's when people usually start feeling somewhat better. And then it usually takes people a good year or so, a year or 2 years or whatever, to sort of say, I've readjusted, I've sort of gotten used to my life without so-and-so in it. Doesn't mean I don't miss them, doesn't mean I wish they weren't here, et cetera, but I can see that maybe for the first time I'm beginning to believe I can really make it, or whatever, okay? Now, on the bottom here, I've put this caveat in which says that that would be, as I said, average. There are other things that can occur which make this process much more long, much more in duration. For example, Oklahoma City, the World Trade Center, anything like that big event, studies have shown it can take a good 2 or 3 years for people to hit bottom. All right, so think about the World Trade Center in 2001. That says that 2003, 2004, those that were affected could have still been worse than they were early into 2002. Now, I guarantee, unless you know this, no one in the world is thinking, I should really be extra helpful to them now because they're probably hitting bottom. Most people probably felt they were long past it and should be well over it, okay? Your experience is going to be much more, in my mind, going to be fighting those that think you should be better faster than it's going to be, why is everyone still trying to help me? At least that's the way the majority of people I've seen. So I just want you to get that time frame perspective so you know that, if you start to feel around 6 months or whatever, you're starting to really hurt. I mean, that unfortunately is normal, and don't feel so like there's something really going wrong.